First speaker, Yara Paoli. So once again, please help me welcoming Yara.
Dobry dzień. That's all the Russian that I know, I'm sorry. So definitely your English is going to be better. Well, first of all, I wanted to thank Yaroslav for the lovely introduction and all the people that are working here, volunteering for organizing such a great event. It's an honor to be actually opening this conference, and I hope you'll find it very useful for your jobs. So, what am I going to talk about today? I think the title is self-explanatory, how not to screw up your company. Well, the point is that every company needs and wants to grow. But growth, unfortunately, doesn't come very easily. And, when you think about growth, normally you think about growth in revenue, in the number of product releases, growth in terms of customers. What we don't think about very often, though, is growth in terms of employees and their morale. And why is that? Because this is one of the most difficult factors to get right in a business. So what I'm going to do today is to share a tip or two about what I've learned during my experience in order for you not to fuck up your business. So when you are a startup or even a bigger organization, you would hope that hiring more people actually equals to bigger outcomes. So the ideal scenario would be to see a line like the green one that you see here, or even better, the dotted line. Unfortunately, the reality is quite different. And what happens in practice is that outcomes more closely resemble this chart, which basically shows that we'll regularly experience productivity plateaus or what Andrew Grove would call critical inflection points. So, what can we do to avoid these plateaus? Basically, you need to put a lot of focus and attention in building a solid company growth culture. So, let's see the fundamental pillars of building a growth culture. You see here 4 core elements that I'm going to share with you today. And I will start from the first one, which is potentially even the most superficial one, but that a lot of companies and also a lot of people confuse with what means to be and have a cool culture. So you might have heard a lot of people saying, oh, we have a really cool office, we got ping pong tables, we got 2 screens, we got free food and drinks, and also we got pizza and beer Friday. That's amazing. Our culture is the best. Well, unfortunately, building a great growth culture goes well beyond that. But the reason this is quite popular is because this is a factor that is very easy to manipulate and to impact. And HR people can actually have an impact on this very easily. If we really want to build a solid growth culture, though, we need to think about growth as a discipline. So if you think about it, growth in theory, should be everyone's responsibility, right? Many times instead we think the growth belongs or pertains just to one team, may it be called growth or not. However, if you really want to grow strategically and tactically your business, someone needs to focus on growth specifically. And what do I mean by growth here? I mean connecting the core product value that your product teams develop to the target user with as much frequency as possible. So, if you want to build a functional growth culture that will allow you to do this, you need to embed in your organization growth as a discipline in the first place and create a functional system that will allow that to flourish. The first thing, if you decide to actually create a dedicated growth team, is thinking about how to delineate the expectations that you have for your team. Often growth is not very well defined, so people that work in growth don't actually know where they sit, where they belong, what they're supposed to deliver for their CEO, and so on. So you might have in your business a competency framework for the product function, for the engineering function, for even marketing, but it's more rare to see a well-developed competencies framework for growth. So you see here a template that I put together very quickly for you today about how a competencies framework for growth should look like. In case of the growth function, you will need to establish specific competencies around the AAARR Metrics, or AAARR, marketing channels, proprietary distribution channels, even market-specific knowledge. And you need to specify the scale at which you're gonna influence the markets and the impact of your job. You can see here that the competencies that you develop should actually vary depending on the maturity of a growth manager. In this case, I just wrote down from growth executive to chief growth officer. Why this is important? Because clarity of vision and expectation is being related by research to greater achievement of growth. I would like now to share with you a practical example of how we embedded the growth discipline at Skyscanner. This was developed along probably a period of 2-3 years, so not a sudden action, and it required a lot of effort. But you can see here an example of how the Skyscanner team looked like before implementing the growth discipline. Basically, it was the traditional setting divided in silos, product doing their job, engineering doing their job, and marketing doing another job. So in the best scenario, these teams had different goals. In the worst scenario, they had competing goals. So go figure how much growth you can deliver in this setting. At this point, there was no culture of growth, and growth was everyone's responsibility and no one's really in the end. So what we've done was to look at the skills necessary to understand growth, the recruitment process to seek growth talent, and grow our own growth culture. The first thing was to look at the change that was needed in the team skills. So while before we had traditional marketing skill sets, we decided that actually to make our growth teams more independent and autonomous and more functional, we had to require a different level of expertise from our people. So we started to demand, literally, that a growth manager should be a mix of marketing and commercial competencies, have strong product sensibilities, but also be great at data analysis and experimentation. After doing this change, that was supported, by the way, by an internal educational program called Growth Hacking Ninja program, we also looked at changing the recruitment process. Because, of course, we not only wanted to improve and enhance the skills of our existing marketing team, but we also wanted to look for new growth talent externally. So we identified 7 traits that are fundamental for a growth marketeer. You can see them listed here, but obviously it's all about being impact-driven, focused on outcomes, being T-shaped and an avid learner, being able to embrace an agile methodology and a scientific method, and of course being addicted to data. With this identification of the 7 traits, we looked at the entire recruitment process and we changed the way we were looking for talent, for which we started to have a growth team that was embedding people with different backgrounds, from engineering to statistics to marketing to communication and so on. What we looked at next was also changing the team structure. Many people think the structure comes first. Actually, the change in structure should just be a support to a change, not vice versa. So you can see that here in a typical squad model, after embedding the growth discipline, we have this group of people working towards the same goal. So we had commercial, we had the new growth marketeer, designers, engineering, and data science working together. I'd like to highlight that obviously this model might not work for everybody, and your company might need to adapt it to your current needs. The biggest change in structure that we went through was concerning the formation of a brand new growth team. So you can see here that the first iteration that we experimented with was made of a central growth team and 3 regional growth teams. The central growth team was basically looking after marketing automation, everything related to the engineering of growth, algorithmic marketing, and enabling the region to grow at scale. Regional growth, instead, was exactly about that, growing the business and winning in every market. Product and engineering tribes at the time kept working in the same way as before. So this was the first transformation that we've done. We realized after a year or so, though, that we also needed to fix the last remaining silos and inject growth talent into the product teams. So a further change that we have done in our structure looked a bit like what you see here. This is an example taken from our personalization tribe, where you see that growth, product, and engineering tribe leaders are asked to collaborate and lead the tribe together. This structure is basically designed for upfront collaboration and basically remove the silos still existing between growth and product, and in a way oblige the product teams to think about growth at the core of the product. So since the inception of a new feature, they had to think about, how do I grow my product? How do I embed channels that can actually link my core product value to my target audience again and again? After doing this, we also thought that it would be a good idea to develop some specific growth tools that would help us spread the growth discipline across the entire organization, including finance, HR, and other departments. So obviously all of you are familiar with the concept of product market fit. And one of the most important principles around this is that you should never invest a significant amount of money, especially in paid marketing, unless you have achieved product market fit first. So what we have done was to build an internal tool that is called the Product Market Fit tool. This was built around a mathematical model that took into account some internal metrics related to the AAARR metrics, as well as some market-related external metrics. We came up with our own score system to actually assess at which stage a market would be in. We also managed to automate this tool for our country marketers to make their job much easier. You can see here in this example, for example, the visualization of 3 markets. Number 1 and 2 are actually pretty established markets, and number 3 was an emerging one. What this tool allowed us to do was to compare different patterns in the evolution of the product market fit for each different market and spot different trends or even get further insights. We also allowed to track the difference in the total product score. So we could see if we actually had an impact with all the efforts that we were putting in our marketing experimentation. And you can see here an example of how certain APAC markets were trending over time. Not only this, but we also enabled a kind of nice bubble visualization that would allow us to see if in the matter of weeks we were moving product market fits upwards. And you can see here again some APAC markets that I was leading on moving significantly towards a more positive trend. Another tool that we developed to actually reinforce the embedding of a growth discipline in the company is what I would call the North Star metric prioritization tool. I'm sure all of you have a North Star metric or are thinking about having one. Many times the problem with North Star metrics is that they are lagging indicators. So you need to find other metrics that can actually tell you if your work is going to lead to an increase in that North Star metric. In Skyscanner case, this metric was called total transaction value, and is basically a metric that quantifies how much travel Skyscanner as a platform was facilitating for the travelers out there. However, it was particularly difficult to associate this metric to the daily KPIs and metrics that both the product and growth teams were working with. So our very good data scientists built this tool that would facilitate the simulation of scenarios for growth. What you see here is an example of an experiment that was meant to be happening only on app for all the traffic sources we had and in all the countries. And this would lead to an increase in app retention by 1%. What this tool did was to give you an estimate on the impact on TTV, which in this case was an absolute change of plus 5.5%. Why this is important? Not only is going to save time to the marketeers that need to assess the impact of their activities, but it allowed them to prioritize one actions versus another based on impact on the most important metric for the business. This kind of tool actually helps people to start thinking in growth terms and embedding even further the growth discipline. Well, this is all nice, lots of talking, but you might be thinking, okay, did this work? Was there actually a growth impact? Yes, there was. So let me show some graphs that actually demonstrate this. You can see that in the first graph here at the top left, we registered a significant increase in the number of bookings after implementing the product market fit methodology and the product market fit tool. Not only that, but obviously transforming the mindset to a growth mindset from a traditional marketing one, we moved our traffic pattern from a big batch gambling type to iterative and experimental, for which we reached a more steady and solid traffic growth. What you see here instead, it's actually quite impressive hockey stick graphs of 3 of our APAC markets that, after adopting the TTV prioritization methodology, managed to grow tremendously and gain market from the competition. Last but not least, we also checked the brand searches and how Skyscanner was competing with the other 3 core global competitors. You can see that Skyscanner, being the yellow line there, actually took over the competition pretty significantly. So, we have spoken so far about the growth discipline and how we can embed that in your organization. Let's move to talk about the other core pillar of building a solid growth culture, which is goals and execution. So many organizations are brilliant at devising visionary strategies, full of innovation, full of creative ideas. But unfortunately, 80% of them fail at the execution part of that. 80% is a tremendous percentage, guys. And why is that? The problem is that execution is a very, very difficult aspect of growing a business, and it requires discipline, methodology, clarity of communication, and coordination across all teams. That is why truly seasoned leaders not only set specific goals, but also they implement a cultural system that ensures the achievement of these goals. So as you might know, there are many ways of setting up clear goals. OKRs is one of these, SMART goals, you might call them KPIs or whatever. The point is that these systems, unless they are framed in a context of growth culture, they're not going to work. And I'm going to share with you an example that I've taken from a company I was consulting for. This was an e-commerce of around 250 people. They were going through an inflection point, so a bit of steady growth, and they started to, evaluate options of what they might do to actually get out of this inflection point. So one of the senior leaders realized that they didn't have a clear methodology to set clear goals for them, and they weren't distributed equally across the teams. So they came across the OKRs methodology, and they organized one full intensive day with the senior leaders to actually come up with new objectives and key results. What happened is that these 15 senior leaders gathered themselves in a room. They came up at the end of the day with brilliant objectives, well spelled and written out, and a set of key results. After this, however, what they've done is to basically do a sort of top-down delivery of these OKRs to their teams, who, up to that point, were not involved in the process. So what happened is that even if the senior leaders meant well in implementing the OKR methodology, this activity ended up in further stagnation of growth. And why is that? Because they didn't think about the cultural system in which they were implementing these OKRs. They didn't think about how to involve the teams, how to get their buy-in in this new methodology, how to get their contribution in setting up these goals. And they didn't care that much about a clear communication of the why they were doing this. So the results is that we got a lot of feedback, like the ones that you can see here. You know, like a software engineer came to me after the OKR session and said, this is the OKR nightmare. A growth marketeer was very pissed off and said, I really don't agree with this. I don't understand why we're doing that. Another person from the product team complained that they just told us what to do without involving us. And this type of complaints in a team can spread very fast and can cause disorientation and unhappiness in your organization. Obviously, this will lead to a stagnation of growth because people are not motivated and not buying into their jobs. I would like to share another example that is pertinent when we talk about growth goals and execution. So, today's organizations are subject to change at an unprecedented pace. If we think about external factors, change is driven by many factors that organizations cannot really control, such as technology, innovation, competitors, and other market forces. Internally, instead, change is driven by growth, employee dynamics, and other factors that actually can be controlled by the company itself. So the ability to define clear goals helps cut through this complexity. But even if you do that, priorities seem to be never-ending, and I'm sure lots of you are probably overloaded with tasks to deal with and lots of priority. The problem is that in a context of ever-evolving change, you need to be able to continuously adapt your priorities according to that change. And not only that, also according to the growth needs of your business. But what happens is that lots of companies and lots of people actually adopt a linear prioritization culture, which basically consists in scoring your activities from a scale of 1 to 10 or 1 to 100. The results of that is a visualization like this one that you see here, for which priority 1 is looking very similar to priority 2 because they only score 1 point apart. Priority 2 looks very similar to priority 3, so you end up not having prioritized anything really. So one practical change that you can do to embed a growth mindset in your organization is moving to a logarithmic prioritization culture, which means prioritizing your activities on powers of 10. Why is that a difference to the way you work? Because you end up having a prioritization list that looks a bit like this graph, where priority 1 is 10 times more impactful on your growth than your priority 2. And your priority 2 is 10 times more impactful than your priority 3. So you see that the two scenarios are pretty different. And this methodology was tested in different businesses and was found to be correlated to faster and greater growth. So, we've spoken about 3 components of our growth culture. Let's move on to talk about the last pillar of a great growth culture, which is called psychological safety. This is a term that even many senior leaders have never heard about. But actually, this is a very, very important factor. And it was found to be the #1 factor in the most impactful teams at Google itself. Actually, you can see that in this research carried out by an operations analyst at Google, there were 5 factors that counted in defining a successful team at Google. But the most important one, in order of importance, was psychological safety. So what is psychological safety? It's really the fact that team members feel safe to take risks and they can feel vulnerable in front of others. Let's dig a bit deeper into this, because this is a very important concept for an organization, especially a startup. So if you create a situation of psychological safety, what you have is that you will be comfortable in admitting mistakes. If you are comfortable in admitting mistakes, you'll probably be comfortable in learning from failure too. If you do that, probably not only you, but also your colleague will openly share their ideas, because they're not going to fear to be judged by others. The more ideas you share, the more innovative your company will be. The more innovative your company will be, the more experimentation you're going to run. And we all know that more experiments are linked to more growth. So you can see how this circle affects the growth of your business. In the opposite scenario instead, where you have psychological danger installed in your business, people will be afraid of admitting mistake. And they will end up blaming others because they cannot admit that it was their fault or that it is okay to make a mistake. They will also become less likely to share different views. And this will lead to a flattening of the ideas that are shared in your business. So this will lead to less experimentation. And of course, this will lead to less growth. So try to imagine yourself in a position of high accountability. So you're responsible for a big team of 30, 40 people. You've got pretty tough goals to achieve in the next quarter. And you live in an environment where there is no psychological safety. There are no spaces for mistakes. You're not feeling comfortable in saying that a set of experiments actually failed. You cannot actually feel comfortable in taking a turn in your methodology and learning from these mistakes. The way you're gonna feel is probably be anxious all the time, because you cannot move, you don't have space for growth. You're always afraid of being judged by others and by your superiors. In the opposite scenario, where you have the same level of accountability, but you live in a company where you feel psychologically safe, you are always moving in what I would call a learning zone. Why? Because making mistake is fine. Not knowing everything is okay. And learning is actually the desirable condition. So if you are in this situation, it is very likely that you're also going to encourage your direct reports and your peers to adopt the same mentality. This will lead to greater growth for your business. So, okay, this is a very nice concept, probably not very easy to install. So how do we guarantee psychological safety? Well, not an easy task, but the first thing that we should look at in our organization is ensuring that the HR team is of high quality. And what do I mean by this? That the HR team should lead by example. If you got some company values or company principles, they should be the first one that actually behave according to that. Of course, not only the HR team, all the senior executive team should lead by example and encourage people to feel safe in the organization, admitting mistakes, learning from them, and communicating openly their ideas to each other. That's where the second factor comes into place. Training is super important and encouraging people to learn more and more. This is what I would call the growth of growth. The third aspect is probably quite obvious after what I said, is the definition of values and the coherence of behavior from all the executive team, but all the people in your business. So there should be no tolerance for deviance from the company values that you establish for yourself. The fourth point is something that is quite tedious for a lot of people, and it's about corporate politics. Unfortunately, politics seems to creep in at some stage in every business, and they are extremely damaging. So if you want to guarantee psychological safety for your team, there should be a zero tolerance policy for politics. And stuff like undeserved promotions, for example, should never, ever happen. The last point, but not least, is that trust and transparency are the supporting pillars of such a culture. I read somewhere in an advertising that trust is a one-time gift. Well, if that is true, you understand the importance of not breaking the trust of your employees or your colleagues, and why it is so essential to establish psychological safety and mutual trust from each other. So, I'm going to try to conclude now with another example that I have taken from the implementation of company values at Preply. Preply, as you might know, is an online tutoring platform that matches great tutors online for languages and students that want to learn a language. So they called out 5 core principles for the company, and they demand that every employee behave accordingly. The principles that are more relevant for this discussion in terms of promoting and encouraging psychological safety are 2 or 3 here. I would say that efficient communication is one of these. At Preply, we listen carefully and speak openly in all our interactions. Having this written out as a value says a lot about the importance that the company gives to diversity of thinking, to open-mindedness, to different ideas. Curiosity. We learn a lot and we learn fast. Obviously, this is encouraging a continuous learning experience, not only in words, but in facts. For example, encouraging people to sign up for conferences, doing online courses, even encouraging, obviously, to learn new languages on the same platform itself. And of course, this is in a context of ownership where, people are demanded to deliver on the commitment that they took. So it's not just a fluffy declaration of, we all love each other, we respect each other and so on. It is respecting each other, ideas and differences of opinions, but also demanding that work gets done to actually achieve growth. So I'm going to conclude with an example of how the value of curiosity actually was applied in an example of failed experimentation. So at some point, one of the product teams looked at redesigning the search algorithm, which, as you can imagine, in a marketplace like Preply is pretty fundamental. So the way you show the top search results for tutors to a student that is looking up for language courses. What happened is that, however, even if it was meant well to optimize the search results, tutors with very low availability ended up being shown at the top end of the search results. Of course, if you got little availability, it's going to be very difficult for a student to schedule a class in. So the team found out that, availability was a super important factor in determining, a higher conversion rate, and they took a learning out of this failure. So they modified the search algorithm again, and what happened is that reconsidering, the way to show availability slots in the results, they ended up achieving an increase of 8% in the conversion rate to new paying customers. So again, this is just a simple example to show how encouraging curiosity and an open-mindedness to accept failure but learning from it can lead to further growth for your organization. So I'd like to finish now with a quick recap of the 4 core pillars that I shared with you today and that are the core constituents of a healthy growth culture. So we started talking about the hygiene factor that mistakenly are considered to be the most important aspect of a culture by many people. Well, we saw that this is not the case, and actually that embedding growth as a discipline, having clear goals and an execution strategy, and last but not least, establishing psychological security in your startup is absolutely fundamental to achieve sustainable long-term growth. Well, I thank you very much for listening, and I hope you can get some takeaways from here.
Do we have any questions? We have volunteers in the room who can give the microphones for those who have questions. So raise your hand so we can see. Yeah, we have one person here. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Andrew. I want to ask a question about these squads with growth and product and engineering people. Can you just give some particular example of how does it work and what does this growth manager do in these particular squads, and some example how this works?
Sure, good question. A lot of people are curious about that. So let me take an example from the Central Growth Tribe that I mentioned before. We had a squad that was called Traveler Comms. This squad mission was basically to increase the engagement with travelers. So basically it's a squad about re-engagement channels. And it was in fact a growth product team because their tasks were around building sustainable growth channels for re-engagement. So how was the squad structure? We had a senior growth manager that was basically acting as what we know to be the product owner. Why is this? Because he had the greatest knowledge about re-engagement channel, how they work, different platform, how to do the integrations, how they need to be built to actually be functional to the purpose, and so on. This squad had a technical squad leader who was a senior engineer that was actually overlooking at the technical aspect and managing the engineers in the squad. They also had 5 engineers that obviously were looking at front-end and back-end aspects. And these guys were basically building the integration for efficient push notification, running experimentation around web push, or even integration with bot chats, like the Messenger, Facebook Messenger bot, for obviously re-engaging users that wanted to ask questions around possible trips. And they were running all the email marketing campaigns, not in the execution aspect, that was actually run by the regional marketeers, but in enabling at scale the development of email marketing and what we used to call internally smarter email. So, you know, the aspect related to customization and localization of your email marketing campaigns, the personalization element that goes with that, as well as the scalability of the technical solutions that they were adopting. So this is just a typical growth squad that we used to have in that moment in time. Hopefully I have answered your question, but feel free to ask more.
Hi, Yara.
Yes?
To be me. Thank you for your nice talk and very polite way and all this. Very good to hear. So you mentioned on some of your part that when you were implementing OKR, there was like 4 unhappy smiles. Could you maybe comment on this? How would you recommend to do it more smoothly? Or maybe how did you manage those unhappy smiles? Mm-hmm. Thanks.
Thanks for the question. So I think, at that time, I was advising for this business. And the first thing that we looked at was how to make, the people on the ground that are actually doing and executing the job feel more participant in this process. So what we found out is that the communication aspect of explaining, first of all, why this change in the process of setting up goals was needed in the organization. And the reason was simply because there was chaos in the organization, Every single team was setting up their goals, but they didn't converge in, let's say, a top growth level goal. So, it was difficult also to manage finances, budgeting, and everything that went with that. So the first aspect was that, clarifying the why to get the buy-in from all the people that then would have to deliver against those OKRs. The second thing was actually an effective communication that didn't involve just the senior management, but actually all the other levels of people from, senior exec to tribe leader to squad leader, and then obviously the squad team members that, again, were supposed to then execute on the job. So I think, they did wrong a lot of things in terms of involving and engaging their people in the first place, explaining why this change was needed, communicating very clearly not only the what the OKRs were standing for, but how this would improve the execution aspect, how this would be a better process compared to before, and how could people actually play a role in this change. So I think it was a question of poor change management, and basically taking people with you on a journey of change that was supposed to lead to faster and bigger growth, and in the end, obviously took another roughly 4 or 5 months of stagnation before people moved along and adopted OKRs more happily.
Okay, thanks for your presentation. I have really quick question. So, in your last case with search results, you have called it learning from failure. And what exactly was the failure? You were serving search results, and later you figured out that availability affects the conversion rate. What was the exact failure?
So the failure was that the team ran some optimization, hoping that the order in which the search results for tutors was going to be shown would actually lead to further increasing conversion rate, and that the changes developed would actually add value to the students. What actually happened was the opposite, that for a mistake in the way the algorithm was changed, tutors with very little availability were shown at the top. So students looking for that were seeing tutors that maybe they liked, but they didn't have slots available to actually schedule a class in. So it was no use for the students, and the risk was that we were going to lose the students because the service didn't look very effective. So this is the failure, basically. Then they realized that the importance of availability of tutors was an important factor in the conversion rate, and therefore made a further change. I hope it's a bit clearer.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you very much for this presentation.
Thank you very much.